Hello everyone, this is our video about the past perfect tense, and today we are going to start with a little revision of the present perfect tense first, because from your digests you probably have already seen that the past perfect really looks like the present perfect, but it is used in past time context when we have a story, a narration, a book, unlike the present perfect, which is used in dialogues, in conversations and emotional stories. So first of all, let's look at the present perfect a little bit. It has three meanings. The first meaning is an action accomplished before the moment of speaking and viewed back from that moment of speaking as part of the present situation. And our typical example was that I have broken my arm, so I can't write on the blackboard now. Or alternatively, you can say, yes, I have seen James. I know that now he has blue hair, for example, or something like that. Then the second meaning of the present perfect was about some special cases where it substitutes the present perfect continuous, right? So it is the meaning, the action that began before the moment of speaking and continues into it or up to it with stative verbs in negative sentences or in passive voice. And our examples were about so, like, for example, when you come home and your grandmother is watching a TV show and she says, "Oh, please, hush, Maria," this is the last episode, "Maria has loved Antonia since the first episode and now it's the last one." So then the third meaning of the present perfect was about the situation when one action needs to be in the future, so it's a future action in adverbial clauses of time, condition, and concession when there is priority. It's like, for example, you say, "I will come back when I have seen the world. Only after I have seen the world, I will come back home." Or, "I will eat this candy after I have finished my porridge." Or, "We will give you your friend back when you have paid us $1 million. So there is this very strong priority. One action should happen before another action, and at the same time there is this adverbial clause of time, condition, and concession where we can't use the future, so we have to use some sort of present in there. So now that you brushed up this present perfect ideas, let's move on to the past perfect, and I have some slides for you. So, sorry, let me move to the first one. And here we can see that the past perfect is built up as an analytical tense, right? It's an analytical tense and it has the auxiliary verb have in the past indefinite, which is had. This verb is going to be moved to the first position in general questions. We're going to put the negative particle not after it. So we say that 2020 hit us hard. Who knew that life had been so simple and easy? We couldn't help smiling when we thought about all the things that had annoyed us before. And been and annoyed are third forms of the notional verb, which means that this is exactly like present perfect again, but the auxiliary verb is changed into the past, right? I had been happy, I hadn't been happy, had you been happy before this happened, right? Then let's move on to the first meaning. Meaning 1. The action accomplished before a given past moment and viewed back from that moment. I would also suggest that somewhere in your digest, somewhere you put down the key word for this meaning. It's priority, предшествование. So one action should happen earlier than the other, but we don't tell about it as a succession, we break the regular order. We say that something happened, and then we get back to the action that had happened earlier. We break the regular order. So here, for example, Morgan replied. We have a story, we have a situation where lots of things go on. So Morgan replied that something had happened even earlier, that he had informed the authorities already. By the way, the authorities will be translated as власти, местные власти. So it's important. It's a good word to remember. Or other typical examples here. Barbara showed us the souvenirs she had brought from China. She was in China before we met, right? So this sentence interrupts the regular order. She showed us the souvenirs technically is after she had brought them from China. But we mention it first, and that's why we need the past perfect to get back to that deeper past. It makes sense if you normally have difficulty trying to understand which action is early and which one is later. Think about the past as being behind your back. So you say, I asked Monica what she had brought that day, and had brought is deep in the past, deeper. You have to look back at it. So in the glove compartment, I found the keys I had lost last year. Of course, I lost them first and then I found them next. But in the sentence, the action of finding the keys is mentioned first, and the action of losing the key is mentioned later. And that's why we need to get back to deeper past. We need to look back from the point where I found the keys into the back point where I had lost them, right? The third example here, Grandpa treated us to some apples from the tree he had planted when our mother was born, right? So there is this past story. There is the single action when the grandfather treated the children, the characters, to some apples, and then these apples were from the tree that had been planted long ago, deep in the past, right? And again, this sentence breaks the regular order of things. Logically, first he planted the tree. Well, their mother was born. He planted the tree, and then he treated them to some apples. But we mentioned the action of treating, угощать, first, and then planting next. And that's why we need to get back into this deeper past, right? So when we speak about the first meaning, we explain it that the action in the past perfect is something which happened earlier. We look into the deeper past, and it breaks the regular order of narration, the succession of actions. It returns us to something deeper, right? Let's go to the second meaning. The second meaning is the action that began before a given past moment and continued into it or up to it. So we can see that this is again the same sentence we used in the present perfect and the present perfect continuous, and now it's the past perfect, but we use it instead of the past perfect continuous in the situations when it's not possible to use the past perfect continuous, right? And this three situation again, A, B, and C, stative verbs, negative sentences, and passive voice, right? So here we have an example with a stative verb to be. Francesca realized they had been acquainted for 15 years. Francesca поняла, что они уже знакомы 15 лет. There was a moment in the past, a given past moment, when she realized that. And 15 years before that, there was this long action that continued for 15 years before that moment and into that moment. And because the verb is stative, we can't use the past perfect continuous. So we have to use the past perfect as the simpler, shorter tense, right? Then let's look at more typical at the typical examples, and I broke them into three parts so that we don't mix up the three cases: stative verbs, negative sentences, and passive voice. So stative verbs first. Francesca was sad to see the man she had loved all these years in such a terrible state. There is this single action, this moment in the past when she was sad, she saw him, she was sad, and then all these years before she had loved him, right? But love is a stative verb, so we can't use the past perfect continuous, we just use the past perfect. The second example, the actor had the loveliest voice the audience had ever heard. There was this moment in the past when the audience heard the actor, right? All these years before that, the audience had heard nothing like that, right? So this here is a stative verb, that's why we use the past perfect. And let's take the example on the way to the harbour. We encountered all the challenges we had ever imagined. По пути в гавань мы встретились со всеми препятствиями, которые только могли себе представить, когда-либо себе представляли. So for several days when we were planning the trip, we had imagined these challenges, and then the moment we traveled to the harbor, we encountered all of the things we had imagined before, right? And again, the past perfect instead of the past perfect continuous, because to imagine is a stative verb. And my favorite example here, this was the ugliest and the dirtiest room I had seen in my life. The character entered the room, saw it, that's the single action in the past, and before that, for many years, he had seen lots of rooms. None of them were as ugly, as dirty as this one, right? So for many years, the actions of seeing lots of rooms were earlier than this action of seeing this room, right? But to see is a stative verb, so we can't use the past perfect continuous, we just use the past perfect. Let's take the second case of the second meaning with negative sentences, right? And here there are some pretty interesting examples which I'm just going to translate so that you see how this priority is explained here, is reflected in the Russian language. The research team discovered a bacterium which had not been described before. Команда исследователей обнаружила бактерию, которая раньше не была описана, которую раньше никто не описывал. The criminals had not been arrested before, so the police could not find them in the database. Этих преступников до этого не арестовывали, поэтому полиция не могла теперь их найти в базе данных. So there is a point in the past when the police could not find them, and before that, for many years, they had never been arrested. They had not been arrested since they started their criminal activity, for example. The crew did not know that nobody had sent the distress signal. Команда не знала, скорее всего, команда корабля, что никто не посылал сигнал о помощи, сигнал бедствия. So they did not know at that moment, which is in the middle of the story, that before that, for many days, nobody had sent the distress signal and nobody knew that they were in distress. The doctor complained that the patient had explained nothing. Доктор пожаловался, что пациент вообще ничего не объяснял. So for several days when the patient was in the hospital, the patient explained nothing, and it preceded the moment when the doctor complained. So 10 days ago, the patient didn't explain anything. 5 days ago, still no explanation. 3 days ago, 1 day ago, so for 10 days, for some time, the patient had explained nothing. And nothing is a negative sentence. I remind you that as soon as you get one negative word, the sentence becomes negative, right? You don't have to have not. You need to have any sort of nobody, nothing, never, and so on. So let's look at the third case of the second meaning, passive voice verbs, right? So here we have 3 examples. The descendants of the writer discovered some essays that had been published only once and disappeared. Потомки писателя обнаружили несколько сочинений, которые были опубликованы только однажды и потом исчезли. So had been published is oh my god, that's actually a mistake. I think this is the first meaning of the past perfect. Sorry, I think this example doesn't work. So some essays had not been published, maybe, or had not been published at all and disappeared. This would be the correct example. They had not been published for 10 years and now they were. So Charles explained that he had been brought up in the asylum and needed help in figuring out how to pay rent. The translation here. Чарльз объяснил, что он воспитывался for a long time в приюте, и ему нужна была помощь теперь разобраться, как платить арендную плату за квартиру. So he had been brought up, this is a passive voice form, and for many years, it's a long time, he was in the asylum for 10 years before that moment, right? So we use the past perfect instead of the past perfect continuous because the verb is in passive voice. And then I remembered that this extraordinary name had been mentioned in the conversation. я помнил, что это странное имя уже упоминалось в разговоре. So, again, passive voice, so past perfect. The conversation took a long time. For several times the extraordinary name had been mentioned, and mentioned, and mentioned, and now the person remembered that, right? So then let's move on to the third meaning. And the third meaning looked like the worst one, but it's actually the rare and easy one, because it fully coincides with the third meaning of the present perfect. We just have one extra condition. So it's a future action, still the same idea. In adverbial clauses of time, condition, and concession, still the same idea. When there is priority, still the same. And here is the new piece, and sequence of tenses. Sequence of tenses is translated as согласование времен. So we are going to take it at the end of May, but now I can tell you that this is the idea, that you look at all actions in the sentence from the point of view which happened earlier, later, or at the same time. So here we speak about the case when we move the direct speech, like I will come back when I have seen the world, into indirect speech. Like Paula said she would come back when she had seen the world. It's the same sentence, just moved deeper into the past, right? Or here, for example, Jeremy dreamed. There are two variants of the verb to dream in the past. One of them is regular, one of them is irregular. Dreamt or dreamed, both are okay. Jeremy dreamed that he would get back to the native village and marry Annette when he had earned enough money, right? So right at the moment, Jeremy did not leave the village yet, right? So he's still dreaming about the future action when he was going to earn enough money, and when he was going to marry Annette, and the action of marrying is going to happen after he earns money, right? So from the point of view of the past, Jeremy is in the past, deep in the past. He dreamt that in the future he would get back to the village and marry Annette when in a little bit earlier future he had earned enough money, right? Or for instance, Molly decided that she would eat the bar of chocolate after she had learned the poem by heart. So first, in the future, she learns the poem, and then in the future after that, she eats the bar of chocolate, and she looks at all these situations from the past point of view. So for us, it's not future anymore. It's only future for Molly, for the character, right? So I hope these three meanings are clear and nice, because now we have some patterns. You know, there is a problem with the textbook, because after it gives the meanings, it gives you a lot of special cases, and many people get tired and confused at that point. Now, you see, the idea of these special cases is that it's nice to remember them, but you don't have to. If you understand the principle and the meanings, how the tenses work, you don't have to learn these special cases. But it's nice to remember them in case you want to speak faster, right? There are some typical combinations, how you see these tenses in the sentence. And it's easier to speak faster if you remember these typical combinations. So I broke all of the things mentioned in the textbook into the 4 kinds of basic combinations. So you don't have to learn it, but it's nice to remember, right? So the first pattern is that in a lot of situations you come across the combination when something had happened. It is clear from the situation that it happened earlier, and now something else is going on, right? So here you have a combination of the past perfect plus the past continuous. And let's see how it is translated. So I have 4 examples here. The rain had stopped, and the sun was shining brightly. Дождь уже прекратился. You don't have the word already, but you translate it because you get it from the past perfect, right? Дождь уже прекратился, и теперь ярко сияло солнце. So the sun was in the process, and the rain had happened earlier, right? Or Monica had finished her homework and was having tea. Моника уже закончила делать домашнюю работу, а теперь пила чай. И теперь пила чай. So something had happened, and now something else was in progress, right? Alfred had cleaned the mess and was picking up glass with a look of reproachful dignity. Альфред уже убрался, и теперь подбирал с пола стекло с взглядом полным упрекающего достоинства или со взглядом полным упрека и достоинства. So before that, he had cleaned the mess. For example, somebody dropped a cup and the cup broke, right? So first Alfred wiped the tea from the floor, and now he was picking up glass, right? So something had happened, now something else was in process. Then, the last example here, we had made peace, and now we're walking in companionable silence. I, for some reason, very like the word companionable. Doesn't have a correct Russian equivalent, but let's try. Мы уже помирились, и теперь шли рядом, дружелюбно помалкивая. So then something had happened and now something else was in progress. It's a very typical situation because a lot of the time when you describe a past situation, you say that something was going on at that moment and something was connected to that a little bit earlier. So then the next pattern is, it was so confusing in the textbook. I'm so sorry for you that you had to read it. But basically, the idea is that when you have the conjunction when, you don't assume anything about the situation because when doesn't mean anything on its own. It can be followed by any sort of combination. You always need to analyze the logic of the sentence. And here there are examples that when is not enough to understand what happens. So the first combination, when Charles arrived, we ordered pizza because he was hungry, for example. So it's a succession of actions. First Charles arrived, then we ordered pizza. Then in the second sentence, we ordered pizza when Charles had arrived. Here we underline that first we waited for him to come back, and only then we ordered pizza, right? So there is priority, предшествование. For example, Charles was the only one who had the money, or we couldn't choose without Charles, or Charles is such a leader that he always decides which pizza everybody eats, right? So there was this important connection that we had to wait for Charles before ordering pizza. Charles arrived when we were ordering pizza, so past continuous plus past indefinite plus past continuous. In this case, these two actions are not related. Charles arrived is a single action and ordering pizza is a background for that action. So we had our own logical life and we were ordering pizza and just at that same moment Charles arrived. So these two actions were not connected, right? Or also we can have a combination. When Charles arrived, we had ordered pizza. For example, we didn't know that he was coming, or we couldn't wait for him because we were hungry. So first we ordered pizza, then he arrived, and this story is from the point of view of Charles, right? Or so as a result, he arrived and learned that we had ordered pizza without him, and maybe he was not happy about that, maybe he was fine, who knows? But the basic idea here is that the conjunction when itself does not mean anything. We can have any sort of combination. We need the logic. What happened earlier, what happened next, right? So we don't assume anything. Мы ничего не предполагаем само по себе. Then the third pattern is not actually quite a pattern, but Russian native speakers have a problem translating it from Russian into English, right? It's all these sentences like «не прошло недели», «не успели мы зайти», «едва мы увидели кошку на крыше, как раздался резкий звук». So these sentences are difficult to translate from Russian into English if you don't know the basic idea that the sentence in this expressive part is translated as the past perfect, and sometimes you have the words hardly and scarcely, right? So here we have 4 examples. I'm going to read them and translate them so that you observe how we translate such sort of sentences. I had not even said hello to Mr. and Mrs. Barnes when their children ran into the room screaming. Я не успел еще и поздороваться с мистером и миссис Барнс, когда их дети забежали в комнату, крича или с диким криком. We hadn't opened our mouths to ask a question when Angelina rolled her eyes and explained again. Мы не успели и рот открыть, чтобы задать вопрос, а Анжелина уже закатила глаза и начала объяснять снова. So she recognized from our faces that we were going to open our mouths and ask a question. We had hardly entered the house when it started to rain. Едва мы зашли в дом, начался дождь. So hardly is translated as едва. Then John had scarcely fallen asleep when the telephone rang. Едва как только Джон заснул, зазвонил телефон. So, или не успел Джон заснуть, как зазвонил телефон. And this scarcely is also едва. And they are synonyms with hardly. Hardly and scarcely are synonyms. There is a very slight difference between them, but at this point you don't need that, really, right? So, this is this third pattern. It means that there are Russian sentences which are difficult to translate into English, and it's nice to remember that they are regularly translated with the past perfect, right? And then the last pattern, maybe the most confusing one, it's about the conjunctions like as soon as, after, till, until, before. So the conjunctions of time, right? And the textbook gives you plenty of examples where you use the past indefinite and past indefinite, and also keeps saying that sometimes, if one action happens earlier, you can use the past perfect. And many people have the logical question, what's the point? Let's decide which one we use correctly. And I suggest that we count all these conjunctions as the same case, the same pattern, and we decide that we use the past perfect only if it is important that one action happened earlier, logically important. The two actions are logically connected. So I'm going to read the couples of sentences and translate them, and you can see the difference, right? As soon as Max left, we started a game of Monopoly. As soon as Max had left, we started a game of Monopoly. Когда ушел Макс, мы начали играть в Монополию. Как только Макс ушел, мы начали играть в Монополию. So you see in the first sentence, where we have past indefinite and past indefinite, the fact that Max left is just a fact. So Max left, we were bored, we tried watching TV, and then we started a game of Monopoly. It's just a succession of action. But we did not start the game because Max left, right? It's not connected. Then, as soon as Max had left, we started a game of Monopoly. It's a totally different situation where Max, for example, hates Monopoly. We never play Monopoly with Max, right? So we were waiting for Max to leave, and after that we started a game of Monopoly. So if we use the past perfect after this sort of conjunction, it means that this previous action is somehow important, explains, is a reason for the second action, right? The second sentence here. We traveled to Israel after Grandma recovered. We traveled to Israel after Grandma had recovered, right? Мы поехали в Израиль после того, как бабушка поправилась. Только после того, как бабушка поправилась, мы поехали в Израиль. So you see again the difference. In the first case, the grandmother was sick, then she recovered, then we had free time, we had extra money, we decided to travel to Israel, right? This is a succession, but it's not really logically connected, right? But in the second sentence, where you have the past perfect, we planned to travel to Israel, then grandma got sick, we delayed our trip, we waited for her to recover, and after that, only after that, we traveled to Israel. If she hadn't recovered, we wouldn't travel, right? It's very much connected. In the third sentence, it's a little bit more difficult to see, but let's see the translation. I waited until the children calmed down a little. I waited until the children had calmed down a little. Я подождал, пока дети немного успокоятся. Или я дождался, пока дети немного успокоились. So in the second case, I'm going to give them some shocking news, right? So it's very important for me that first they calm down and then I talk to them, right? In the second sentence, maybe the children are screaming too much and I'm just waiting for them to calm down because after that I'm going to speak. But it's not really necessary for me to wait until the children have a different emotional state, right? So in the second case, it's much more important that the children calm down first because I'm going to shock them with some news, right? So this seems to be it. So let me come back to you. And you see, the general idea of the past perfect is that first it always is connected with the past time context. It always gives you this feeling that something happened in the deeper past than past. And it's kind of difficult for native Russian speakers because we don't have this idea of deep past. So then it's also very important to remember that the past perfect can be used instead of the past perfect continuous, with all these extra cases where you just can't use the past continuous. And also there is this rare case, the third meaning, when you speak about the future, but you can't really use the future because this is an adverbial clause of time, condition, and concession, and you can't really use the present because you see it's the past time context, so there is no present in it, it's a story, and as a result in indirect speech you say she said she would do something after she had done something, right? So this happens to be it, and I'm going to record a video about the past perfect continuous very soon, which is going to be for the period of your internship, for your practice, translation practice. So stay healthy and have fun with your homework, I guess. Bye!